we all know people who seem to be younger than their chronological age. We all know people who seem to be older than their chronological age. And what's extraordinary is that this is actually true. There are people who are physically, biologically aging at a rate faster than their chronological age. And, conversely, there are those aging younger. And it's just been a source of extraordinary research. And as I just mentioned in the beginning, we didn't think that we could really reverse biological age until very, very recently. And now there's tons of research devoted to it.
Collective Insights is a voyage through topics and technologies revolutionizing human well-being. Groundbreaking approaches for a better world and a better life await you. Welcome to Collective Insights.
Hi, I'm Dr. Gregory Kelly. Before we get into this week's episode, I'm excited to share with you a product I helped formulate called Qualia Synbiotic. Unlike gut health products designed to only address digestion, Qualia Synbiotic is an all-in-one formula that supports nutrient absorption, immune function, metabolic health, and brain performance and mood enhancement. The 28 gut health superfoods and ingredients in Qualia Synbiotic include spore-form probiotics, psychobiotics that are ideal for supporting healthy brain performance, along with prebiotics, postbiotics, and fermented foods. Qualia Synbiotic is also shelf-stable with no refrigeration needed. To try Qualia Synbiotic risk-free for 100 days, go to qualialife.com/insights and use codes INSIGHTS for an additional 15% off. That's Qualia Synbiotic at qualialife.com/insights and code INSIGHTS to start supporting the full picture of gut health. Hi, this is Dr. Greg Kelly. I'll be your host today, and with us, we have Dr. Kara Fitzgerald. She received her Doctor of Naturopathic Medicine degree from National University of Natural Medicine in Portland, Oregon, is an IFM certified practitioner, and lectures globally on functional medicine. She has a clinical practice in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and is actively engaged in clinical research on the DNA methylome, using the diet and lifestyle intervention developed in her practice. And of course, she's the author of a book, Younger You, which we're excited to dive into today. Kara, welcome to our show.
It's great to be here.
Well, I want to just jump right in, and I'm sure some of the audience won't know, but really, I think the inspiration for your book was the first paper that I believe I read in 2021, maybe around March of that year, which you then took the brilliant work in that and turned it into this amazing book. So, maybe give us a little bit of background of Younger You.
Yeah, let me give you the background. And listen, you've got complete permission to cut me off or ask me to explain something, because I can digress and go into a rabbit hole. But I wanted to actually give a little nuance around that. The paper obviously, forms the core of the book, but we released what we called the methylation diet and lifestyle in 2016. So way before we even knew we could reverse biological age in humans. That first study was the TRIM, published in 2019. So when we were underway, our study was already underway then. We began to get interested in epigenetics. I did pretty deeply in about 2013 or so. And it occurred to me that functional medicine could, make or break we were influencing with our interventions epigenetic expression, and were we doing it optimally? And my conclusion was that maybe there were some potential inappropriate, high dose supplement intervention. I guess I don't want to get too dramatic around that, but I want to say that we could design an intervention through the functional medicine lens to sweet talk gene expression, to sweet talk epigenetics, specifically DNA methylation. And that's what we set out to do in our clinical practice. And so we did that back in, we built it and released it to colleagues as a white paper. I presented on it at the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual international conference in 2016, and then set it off. And, my colleagues were sort of mildly interested. They didn't grab hold of it. I mean, I'm sure you probably weren't familiar with, but we just parked it on our site as a white paper, and we used it in our clinic practice. So we thought that it was an interesting and an important enough thing to think about that we could use these tools with all of our patients. Not the same turnkey program, but we would use the principles in patient care. Concurrent to that, though, was, of course, are we actually changing epigenetics? Are we doing what we've posited in this white paper? That was a huge question, clearly, but you can't fill out a Quest lab, for a methylome assessment. We didn't, at that time in 2016, the arrays were not available. We couldn't look at the methylome outside of the research setting. And, just miracle of miracles, we were, after, many head puzzling conversations around how we might do this, we were given an unrestricted grant to study it, meaning I was in control entirely of the study design. And we hired the HealthGot Institute, a clinical research center out of my alma mater, the National University of Natural Medicine. And they're a great research institute and really versed in natural interventions. And so that was launched. Our study was launched in 2018. We were working on the IRB in 2017, launched our study in 2018, intending and knowing that looking at the whole methylome, looking at gene expression was a core piece, but still biological age reversal in humans was thought not possible. Steve Horvath was clear on that. And so it was during our study that sort of time stood still with the TRIMS trial where we saw the possibility of biological age reversal in humans. And, that was one of our first investigations. And of course, we were able to demonstrate, with our diet and lifestyle intervention that we, nudged at the needle there potentially. But let me just stop and see if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I was going to say for the audience, we're going to go into a few of the terms you've heard, because some people I'm sure will know like what biological age means, what you're talking about, like DNA methylation. We're also going to get into some of, the tips, some of the things that Dr. Kara did with people. So really where I wanted to jump in next was maybe just explain a little bit about what's meant by biological age.
Yeah. So biological age is the physical rate of the aging phenomena, how our biology is sort of responding to the slings and arrows of life. It's different than chronological age. So we can't really do it. We can't do anything about chronological age, the number of birthdays we celebrate it. It just is what it is. But we all know people who seem to be younger than their chronological age. We all know people who seem to be older than their chronological age. And what's extraordinary is that this is actually true. There are people who are biologically aging at a rate faster than their chronological age. And, conversely, there are those aging younger. And it's just been a source of extraordinary research. And as I just mentioned in the beginning, we didn't think that we could really reverse biological age until very, very recently. And now there's tons of research devoted to it. So one of the first things that had to happen, Greg, is that we needed to be able to kind of reliably test it. And I think the testing of the biological age is still a controversial area. Not everybody agrees with the tools being used, but certainly using the biological age clocks that look at DNA methylation. So one of the key epigenetic marks, epi above, genetics are genome. So these are the biochemical changes that influence DNA expression. So it's not it's not DNA directly. It's the little biochemical marks that influence what proteins are produced and so forth. We can look at certain patterns of these epigenetic marks and, predict the rate of biological aging, using these. And there's first generation, second generation, third generation clocks, like they're getting more and more sophisticated. So we can measure biological age now, I think, pretty good. It's very exciting. And so now we can see, whether we can make a difference in it. And so let me stop there and your thoughts.
Well, I would have said felt like I knew a fair amount about these first, second, third generation clocks, how they work. But just for the audience listening, if you're confused, please read her book. You do just amazing job explaining the importance of these. I mean, I felt, much smarter for having gone through that first part of your book and understand But the big picture is exactly what you just said, right? What's happening is with these methylation patterns, genes that, as you explained it in the book, that if they're expressed, they make us act or feel older, are, being not methylated, they're allowed to express themselves. And ones we want to express themselves to keep us younger are getting covered up. And, so your plan kind of, to me, was balanced methylation. We want to rebalance it so that you're younger and healthier. And this is what my plan is.
Yeah. See, it really is that simple. And thank you, because I'll get way esoteric in a heartbeat. Yeah, we want our, the good guy genes on that are going to support vibrant health and longevity. We want those guys on. And we want those bad actors that drive aging forward off, and I think that our study and other studies, research suggests that, we've got a lot to say in the matter.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I really appreciated your book, like I could tell it was written by someone who actually in the real world works with people, right? Because too often I'll read a book and it'll be like, oh yeah, this is really great advice. This is the what to do, but like, how do I do it? You and I know how to do it. We've eaten well. We've, been in circles where people, would help us. But I thought your book was really good with not only the what to do, but like how to do it. Like these are some things I do. This is a brand I might use. And this is like the chocolate. If I'm going to treat myself to chocolate, this is what, I might have. And so, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's real world. We kicked the tires on this program in our clinical practice and did it ourselves. I mean, it's the dietary pattern that really works well for me and has consistently kept, my biological age in what I consider to be a good range. It works. And so, yeah, we've just had a chance to figure out how to nuance it for a variety of people. And we continue to run groups. Actually, I just did a focus group last night with some people who had finished one of our groups to talk to them about their experience and how and you can see, person A does well with, kind of a more intense keto leaning, maybe a little bit higher protein. Person B is going to do really well with, less of that, higher, more dense veg. But you can take it all through the lens of our core principles and make it work. But it's fun to make it work in a real world.
Oh, and one of the things, it was in the subsequent case study paper that came out about less than a year ago. But in that, you mentioned in passing that the intermittent fasting part of the plan was very high proportion of people didn't have a problem sticking to that. But the breathing exercise practice that you recommended you did, which I was surprised. I would think, oh, breathing's not hard, right? Were there other things that you've seen over time with your plan that people just naturally seem to have an easier and more challenging time with?
Good question. We're teasing apart our adherence data from our original cohort. So that should be a paper pretty soon. And in that original cohort, so the first, the 2021 paper, we didn't recommend liver capsules at the time. We just didn't. Why didn't we recommend? I don't even know. I mean, that's the only liver that I eat these days. They're little capsules, and I take a handful of them a day. So that was the worst part of the program for adherence, I think, was liver. But I think probably second to that was the meditation, interestingly enough. Yeah, meditation. But you know what? That reflects my clinical experience. Like, people will come in and they'll be willing to do a litany of testing, take a litany of supplements, engage in their exercise, and then just sort of go, 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 go. In Connecticut, I live it's basically a New York City suburb. And people are living these really high stress, intense lives, sort of. And there's probably an adrenaline addiction in that. And the idea of turning that down within a very intentional meditation is challenging. So I would see that in my practice, and it would often be the final frontier. So people would be, they would hit their wellness goals almost. And it would be like, now we want to think about, you taking the train to New York City and spend, like your 160-hour work week, and then you come home and you're a mom or whatever it is. Like, how are we going to actually make your life sane within the structure that you're living? So it's not surprising to me that the breathing exercise it was poorly adhered to because I've just seen it clinically. But, and I also experience it myself as somebody who can be kind of hard charging as well, that turning that off and down can be challenging for me. Um, but what's incredible, and I talk about in the book, an aha moment for me was the fact that the clock we use, the first generation Horvath clock, 25% of it is regulated by what they call glucocorticoid response elements. And we could just say simply that stress seems to be driving that clock, a large proportion of it. And it really made me wonder deeply how, how strong proportionally stress is as a driver as an intense driver of biological age. I mean, we could see stress in loneliness and lack of community, the stress of COVID, et cetera. I mean, I think that toxic stress is probably like gasoline on the fire of aging. Like, we can't underestimate its power. And yet it's something that's hard for us to really take on in an intentional way.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that was part of your program was, well, I'll just bucket them as prebiotics and probiotics. So, I know you have a long history of interest in that area. Part of your program, you mentioned in your book. So let's dive into that.
So yeah, it's incredibly interesting. So you're probably aware of the 2023 updated Hallmarks of Aging paper in Cell. So dysbiosis is now recognized as one of the hallmarks of aging. And so that means that dysbiosis can drive aging, and mostly we're looking at it in an animal model. A lot of it, there's not entirely, there's some human data, and then reversing it or slowing it down, be it using probiotics, be it using FMT, can slow aging down. And so we can actually manipulate aging with, just by shifting the gut microbiome. So, I mean, it's extraordinary, and it's exciting. And it's exciting to me that that's now a recognized hallmark of aging. But I think there's 9 to, I think there's 12 of them now.
12, yep.
12. And they all interact. So if your conversation is entering it, if you're thinking about biological aging through the lens of dysbiosis, and you really make a difference there, you're going to have a far-reaching effect systemically and influence the rate of bioaging. So yeah, of course, it was something that was important to us. We did use a probiotic in our intervention with very, now, we designed that back in 2016. Now I might change. In fact, I am thinking about changing the probiotic we use. But at that time, dysbiosis wasn't one of the hallmarks, but clearly we know the evidence is there that the chronic diseases associated with aging are in higher risk, as with dysbiosis, intestinal permeability, and all of that. So we know the gut plays a big role, but we also know that, this with your background, the gut makes a multivitamin. If we've got a healthy microbiome, those nutrients that we need for good gene expression, for methylation balance, we're pumping them out. And so we prescribed Lactobacillus plantarum, which has some evidence behind it as being a folate producer. We didn't use, and folate is a key methylation nutrient. We'll talk more about that, I'm sure. But we wanted to support a healthy microbiome, and we wanted to support production of those all appropriate methyl donor nutrients in the gut if possible. And our dietary pattern, so beyond the probiotic, our dietary pattern is, to my knowledge, the most dense. Like, if you look at other dietary patterns out there that are in the research setting that quantify polyphenols, ours, is probably more than double. We're estimating, and I underline that, about 3 grams a day of polyphenols, where if you look at a well-designed Mediterranean diet with an intentional emphasis on polyphenols, you're looking at maybe 1,200, a little give or take. So these polyphenol nutrients are just fabulous for enrichment players for our microbiome and the metabolites, the postbiotics that they produce. And so our program is very, very gut centric, not necessarily. I mean, it just happens to be because that's the most, I think the smartest, most nutrient dense dietary pattern. So yeah, to your point, we need to be thinking about gut health for many reasons, including biological age.
When I know, in the generation I went to naturopathic school in the early to mid 90s, some of the old time naturopaths, they wouldn't have known everything that the functional medicine doctors now understand. But fundamentally, they treated digestion, they treated the liver. And then if those improved, generally good things happen systemically.
It's amazing. Yeah, we had our forefathers in our space. Yeah, they had an appreciation of intestinal permeability. I remember as a student, not as a undergrad, shadowing Eugene Zamperone here when I was in Connecticut, really just a kind of a pillar in the early naturopathic community. And I just remember him on table paper, in the treatment room, diagramming intestinal permeability, way before zonulin was characterized. And, now we know intestinal permeability just drives it. It's associated with aging. It drives aging. It drives chronic diseases of aging. It drives autoimmunity, neurodevelopmental, degenerative disorders, et cetera. Like there's really nothing that IP doesn't seem to have an impact on. And, he got it early on. I mean, it was very embedded in our knowledge base and in our training.
Oh yeah, I remember even when I was first in school, Tyler Encapsulations, which was acquired, that brand doesn't exist, but that was all their products had some, permeability solution built into them back then. So yeah. So you had mentioned in passing folic acid. I want to make sure we get back to that. So, so maybe just talk quickly. In the book, you mentioned both methylators and methyl adaptogens.
Yeah, that was really, I think, kind of the secret sauce of our intervention. It was a real research aha moment for me. So methylation, methyl donors in our space, naturopathic medicine, functional medicine, et cetera, we get them. We know we need B12. We know we need folate. Most of us know about choline, betaine, et cetera. These are the nutrients that feed the methylation cycle that produces that methyl group that goes on to methylate DNA, for example, methylates, many different compounds in the body, methyltransferases, the enzymes that put that methyl group on. I think we're up to 375 of them or something. So it's a fundamental process occurring in the body, everywhere, pretty much all of the time. And DNA methylation is no exception. There's probably, I think there's over 30 million spots on the DNA that have a methyl group. So yeah, super important. Those nutrients are wildly important. Wildly important. We know that we need them. In the aging journey, we turn off genes that protect us from disease. We turn on genes that drive disease. Most classically, and the most science around this is looking at cancer. So as we age, the genes that protect us from cancer, tumor suppressor genes, there's many, 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 many of them, are hypermethylated and inhibited. This is just part of the aging journey. Like it makes you think that there's a program phenomena in aging. Because why do we stop protecting ourselves from cancer? Why are these oncogenes being turned on? Is it just that, I mean, we could speculate, and that would be another just a philosophical discussion at this point. But it's fascinating to me that we start to inhibit protective important genes and we start turning on pro-inflammatory disease-driving genes as we age. And if you look at the tumor microenvironment, if you look in cancer, you'll see the same thing. So that tumor microenvironment mimics the aging journey. It's pretty crazy to me. And so when we dug into the literature, I was struck by the fact that polyphenols seem to be these, what we call methylation adaptogens. Actually, we're just calling all of them now epinutrients because they can influence the epigenome. They don't participate in the methylation cycle, so they're not making that methyl group. And there was a lot but at the time of my book in the literature, and really still today, a lot of the data are cell studies and animal studies. We're starting to accumulate more human trials, but these polyphenols could turn on tumor suppressor genes. So these hypermethylated tumor suppressor genes that can no longer protect us from cancer. And you see them associated, you see this hypermethylated status associated with, many cancer types. Resveratrol can turn it back on. I mean, curcumin can turn it back on. Genistein can turn it back on. Luteolin, sulforaphane, and on and on and on. These nutrients that we know, EGCG and green tea, like these time immemorial nutrients, these nutrients that have been used the globe over in both medicine and in diet, in dietary patterns and traditional dietary patterns. These nutrients maybe, and we know these nutrients are actually pleiotropic. We know these nutrients do many things. They're anti-cancer, they're anti-inflammatory, they're antioxidant, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe the way that they exert this profound pleiotropic effect is because they influence gene expression. They go right to the source. And so it became very clear to me that while we needed the methyl donors, and we wanted to use a food matrix of methyl donors, we didn't want to just throw a bunch of B12 and folate at people. We wanted it delivered in the food matrix, that along with that methyl donor information had to come the information from these extraordinary polyphenols. So to my earlier point, it's 3,000 milligrams of polyphenols, estimated plus per day. So we want that information together. And we could see, as we do our analysis of the changes of methylation in DNA, that we did rearrange how it was happening to a more useful and favorable pattern. And we're continuing to analyze those data beyond just looking at the clocks. We'll publish an epigenome-wide association study where we look at the whole shebang and see what we changed as well.
And for listeners, one of the parts of your book, you go through a dozen of your favorite polyphenol-rich food. You just mentioned a few in passing, the green tea, the turmeric, broccoli or cruciferous vegetables. That's where the sulforaphane plugs in. Can you maybe touch on a couple of the others that are in that list?
Yeah. So the turmeric, I think rosemary made the list. I've just been this sort of fan of rosemary. We've got, fatty fish like, salmon is one of our key players. What else? We've got some seeds in there. I think we've got pumpkin seeds on the list. Shiitake, but could do really mushrooms are epi-nutrient extraordinaire compounds. So, whatever mushrooms float your boat, I think could be on our dynamic dozen list. But yeah, and eggs are on there. Liver's on it. Blueberries. Yep. Yeah, if you like blackberries instead, go for it. I mean, one of my most favorite parts of the book is the appendix, is the nutrient appendix, the epi-nutrient appendix in the back. And it's 30 pages of nutrients that, move DNA methylation. I mean, it's a pretty cool, it's the only nutrient appendix, of its kind that I'm aware of.
Well, you've done the two studies that are published that I mentioned. The one's the case study, then the original one with the 140 plus people. You mentioned that you're going to be publishing some additional data from that. But I was curious, since publication of that, maybe since the book, has there been anything that you've seen that like, wow, I really want to pay attention to this because it might, be something I add to my program?
Yes, that's a good question. I think so. I think that we need to be thinking our protein numbers probably should be higher overall. And I actually blogged about this, and I can send you a link to that blog. Just interpreting protein requirements through the younger you dietary pattern, and I did this for myself. So we want to be. So I would think I would evolve our exercise prescription. Well, let me actually start by saying this. For, in a turnkey setting, we had to make some decisions, to conduct a research study. It's one intervention for everybody. But I do think once you can do that basic, like you want to enter into the basic conversation, you just want to get the party started. But once you're able to do this, we want to have a variety of exercise types. So our original exercise prescription is just 30 minutes, 5 days a week. with a perceived exertion of 60 to 80%. So you're working out kind of hard, but that's it. And you can do whatever you want. It could be walking, biking, whatever you want. I would be more refined about that. As I talked about in the book, we need high intensity, we need resistance training, et cetera, et cetera. And we want obviously concurrent sufficient protein to be able to have adequate muscle mass. And so in order to hit the younger you nutrient targets plus additional protein, I mean, that can lead to just a higher caloric intake than a lot of us need. And so my consideration was just toggling between higher protein days and, higher epinutrient days. And so I blogged about that. I am thinking about moving to a different probiotic. In fact, we'll be doing a couple of our groups using an Akkermansia combination probiotic. And this is primarily, it's because it's a keystone strain. I mean, you probably know a decent amount about it. I mean, it just has it has an outsized influence on us across the board. But, going back to intestinal permeability, we know that it really keeps the mucin layer intact. It's a key player there. So I'm very strongly considering that. So protein, tweaking the exercise prescription, changing out the probiotic for people who are comfortable with a more restrictive, time-restricted eating window. I think that's entirely appropriate. For people who want to do like a caloric restriction, in clinic, we do these things. So in clinic, we've got our nutrient ratios structured for a more a caloric restriction model, or for people who are just at a smaller body habitus, that and aren't going to be able to meet the quantity of our targets. We've lowered them. So yeah, these are some of the things I'm thinking about in the 2.0. We are going to do a study with a clinic system nationwide called Next Health, where we'll be doing the younger you intervention and then layering in like hyperbaric and some other cool stuff. And we're under IRB. We're under IRB for all of these. So people can sign up for our newsletter to get information or follow me on social. But we will keep people informed, should they want to participate.
Great. And this may have changed, but I know in the original paper you mentioned you used the first generation clock from True Diagnostics at that time. Is that still a testing resource that you're comfortable with?
We didn't actually use True Diag. They were not around back when we wrote that paper. Yeah, they're a new clinic. Yeah, they're a new clinical laboratory. Yeah, no, you couldn't get you couldn't get there was no clinical lab doing epigenetics back then. We worked with Yale, so we bought our kits directly from Illumina and we sent them to Yale. Yeah, we work with True Diagnostic now for sure. I think they're doing a good job there. They're really open about what they're doing. They're super involved in science. They just really support us. And I'm a huge fan of the pace of aging. So that's the clock that we're using still, although we're still looking at, or at least we were in our second publication, we were using the Horvath clock. I would say right now, actually, we're pretty much sticking with the pace of aging. That could change, but I think that's it's a pretty affordable and cool tool.
Great.
It's got some good data behind it. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. And before I let you go, you mentioned Instagram. I know you share a lot of resources on your website. So how would be the best ways, just maybe go over it one more time for our listeners to follow you?
Yeah, sure. So you can sign up for our newsletter. Actually, I'm a podcast host also. You should join me on a podcast, Greg. The website for us is drkarafitzgerald.com, drkarafitzgerald.com. Sign up for the newsletter and that'll just sort of give you access to everything else, but the podcast is there as well. Instagram, I think I'm Dr. Kara Fitzgerald as well. Twitter, Kara Fitzgerald ND. And Facebook, I'm Dr. Kara Fitzgerald. We're active on social media. Probably, though, the easiest and the most information dense would be the newsletter.
Wonderful. Well, thanks.
And let me say this. Let me say this. Sorry, my team will kill me. We have a biological age quiz that we feature in the book that's free on the website. So you can go to the website and access that. And you can actually do your own bioage testing. You can access the pace of aging test through our website and a little nutrition consultation on your individual results, which is kind of cool, like what you should do. And we keep it as at a really low price point, at the lowest possible price point we can. So that's a neat way for anybody interested to kind of engage in this conversation for themselves.
Wonderful. Well, thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is for informational purposes only. The podcast is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. You should not use the information on the podcast for diagnosing or treating a health problem or disease, or prescribing any medication or other treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider before taking any medication or nutritional, herbal, or homeopathic supplement, and with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on this or any other podcast. Reliance on the podcast is solely at your own risk. Information provided on the podcast does not create a doctor-patient relationship between you and any of the health professionals affiliated with our podcast. Information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to therein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.